Somewhere in an old family Bible or a fading parish register, or a name typed into an Ancestry website at 2 in the morning, a question keeps resurfacing. Could this surname be older than anyone in the family realizes? Could it reach back to a brotherhood of warrior monks that vanished from history almost overnight? 12 names circulate online, promising exactly that. A hidden thread connecting ordinary families to the Knights Templar, the most secretive military order of the medieval world, destroyed by a king who feared what they had become. But before you search for your own name on that list, there is a question worth asking first. Where did the list come from? Who verified it? And when historians and geneticists actually test the claim, does the evidence hold? Or does it reveal something else entirely? What they found was not the tidy bloodline the myth promises. It was something messier, older, and in its own way more remarkable. This is the story of how a forgotten order left almost no genetic trail, and why that absence became one of history's most persistent myths. To understand why so little survived, you have to understand what the Templars actually were. Founded in the early 1100s, the order was built on vows, poverty, obedience, and for its full knights, celibacy. They were soldiers and bankers, but structurally, they were monks. Membership meant surrendering personal wealth and, in most cases, the possibility of children carrying your name forward within the order itself. Historians studying the Templars are clear on this. The order was designed to end individual lineages, not preserve them. By the early 1300s, their financial power and independence had made them dangerous. In 1307, King Philip IV of France orchestrated mass arrests. Confessions were extracted under torture. By 1312, the order was dissolved by papal decree. Their archives were seized, scattered, and in many cases lost to fire, war, and simple neglect over the following centuries. What remains today is fragmentary. Trial records, land charters, a handful of named individuals tied to specific commanderies. Nowhere in that fragmented record is there a master list of who the Templars were related to, or which surnames would carry their descendants forward. Such a document was never created, because the order was never designed around bloodlines to begin with. If this were only a story about surviving records, it would end here. But something else happened after the order fell. Not every man connected to the Templars was a celibate knight. Historians point to a separate category, confrere members, or lay associates, who supported commanderies financially or militarily while remaining married, landed, and rooted in local noble families. Their names appear in scattered charters. Their descendants, unlike the sworn knights, did continue. At the same time, centuries later, genealogy grew into something closer to a modern industry, and a particular emotional gap opened up. People searching for ancestry wanted more than a list of farmers and unnamed laborers. They wanted a connection to something dramatic: knights, crusades, betrayal by a king, a brotherhood martyred by history. The Templars fit that need almost perfectly. That is the first crack in the story. Not a scientific anomaly, but a cultural one. A demand for meaning meeting a historical record that had almost nothing left to confirm it. And that gap is exactly what lists like the 12 Forgotten Templar Surnames fill. Trace most versions of this list back to their source, and the trail runs thin. No cited archive. No named historian. No genealogical study behind it. The surnames, variations like de Molay, Beaujeu, Payens, Sinclair, sometimes Plantard, are pulled loosely from men who held rank within the order, or who appear in later esoteric writing about it. Somewhere in the retelling, a name connected to Templar history quietly turned into a surname that proves descent. One made that claim carefully. It simply spread until it sounded established. This is where genetics enters, not to confirm the myth, but to test it honestly. Ancestry science relies on three main tools. Mitochondrial DNA, inherited almost unchanged along the maternal line across centuries. Y-chromosome DNA, passed from father to son, tracing a single unbroken paternal thread. And autosomal DNA, the blended inheritance from every ancestor, which halves with each generation until distant ancestors contribute almost nothing measurable. Here is what matters most for surnames specifically. A surname is a cultural label, not a biological one. It tells you what a family called itself, not necessarily whose DNA built that family. Across 8 centuries and roughly 20 generations, adoption, remarriage, illegitimacy, feudal naming customs, and record-keeping gaps all interrupt the clean line a surname seems to promise. So when researchers have actually studied men sharing Templar-associated surnames, a small number of serious studies exist, most notably around Y chromosome haplogroups in families like the Sinclairs. The results did not confirm one unified bloodline. That was not a contradiction. It was a signal. What the data showed instead was multiple, unrelated paternal lines carrying the same surname. Men named Sinclair or de Molay variants, across different regions, do not trace back to a single shared ancestor from the Templar era. They share a name. Genetically, their paths diverge. The story did not collapse. It widened, because what the evidence actually points to is more human and more interesting than a secret bloodline. Surnames spread independently, sometimes through prestige, sometimes through association with a former Templar estate, sometimes simply because a name became common in a region after the order's former associates scattered and resettled. Researchers weighing this evidence generally point to 3 explanations. The first is genuine direct descent. A small number of documented confrere families with real archival links to individuals associated with the order. These cases exist, but they're rare, regionally specific, and provable only through actual paper trails, not surname resemblance. The second, and by far the most common, is surname adoption without bloodline, families who took or inherited a name tied to Templar landholdings without any biological connection to an original bearer. The third is convergent naming, separate families, in separate regions, independently arriving at similar names through occupation, geography, or local patronage, with no Templar connection at all. If uncovering how myths like this take root, and what the evidence actually shows underneath them, is the kind of history you find compelling, it's worth sticking around for more, because the real story is almost always stranger than the version that goes viral. The most important piece of evidence here didn't come from Templar research specifically. It came from a broader body of population genetics, large-scale studies testing whether surnames reliably predict shared paternal ancestry across Western Europe. Those studies found that even stable, common surnames correlate with a shared Y chromosome line only around 1/5 to 1/4 of the time, and that number drops sharply for names with multiple independent origins, or names adopted through patronage rather than direct birth. That second category describes almost every surname on the viral Templar lists. This is the twist the myth leaves out. It isn't that Templar descendants don't exist. Some almost certainly do, quietly, undocumented, indistinguishable in the genome from anyone else walking past you today. The real surprise is where the evidence actually points. Not toward 12 special families, but toward how ordinary the mechanism was, names outliving the people and events that first attached to them. The genome wasn't confirming a hidden aristocracy. It was revealing what the myth had quietly erased, that the centuries after the Templars fell were shaped by land, law, and local naming customs far more than by bloodline. Why does this matter beyond one dissolved medieval order? Because it says something about how history actually survives inside us. We inherit stories more reliably than we inherit blood. A name can travel 800 years, carried by families with no genetic link to its origin, simply because names are durable in a way Ancestry rarely is. Meanwhile, the real genetic threads tying anyone to a specific medieval group are almost always scattered, anonymous, and far more widely distributed than any curated list could ever capture. This pattern isn't unique to the Templars. It shows up in clan names, noble titles, entire ethnic identities assumed to run in unbroken lines. Population geneticists studying medieval Europe find the same thing again and again: movement, absorption, remarriage, and cultural adoption layered quietly beneath names that suggest something far simpler than what actually happened. Picture a Templar commandery on a hillside in southern France, or the dry highlands of Aragon, sometime before 1307, stone walls, ledgers, horses, the particular quiet of men who have given up ordinary life. Some there had taken irreversible vows, Their personal line, in the genealogical sense, was designed to end with them. Others remained tied to family land beyond the fortress walls, married, raised children, and passed down a name that carried the order's memory forward without carrying its blood in any way a record.